Your tap water is one cracked pipe away from disappearing, and you have no backup plan. The men who crossed the Great Basin and the Mojave Desert in the 1820s never ran out of water. Not because they carried enough. They didn't. They survived because they could read the land itself like a living map, and they knew exactly where water was hiding before they ever started digging. Jedediah Smith crossed some of the most brutal desert terrain on the continent with 2 companions and a handful of horses. No filtration system, no emergency cache, no grid. They knew something that modern homes have completely forgotten. And here's the part nobody talks about. That knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because somebody decided a pipe was easier. They were right about the pipe. They were catastrophically wrong about what happens when the pipe breaks. And it is breaking every single day. The year is 1827. Jedediah Smith, 28 years old, already the first American to cross the Sierra Nevada on foot, already the first to traverse the Great Basin, is leading 2 men across the worst stretch of desert in North America, the Mojave. The sun sits on the horizon like a burning coal, and the sand reflects heat upward from below, so the air shimmers in 2 directions at once. Sweat evaporates before it can cool you. There is no shade. There is no wind. There is nothing that looks like water for as far as any of them can see. And Smith is not panicking, because he is scanning the horizon not for water itself, but for the things that tell him water is there. He is reading the shapes of the land. He is watching the birds. He is studying the color of distant scrub on far hillsides, looking for a shade of green that has no business being in a desert, because that green, he knows, means something is alive down there that cannot survive without a hidden source. He was taught this, not in a school, not from a book, from Mojave guides and Tongva men, from decades of accumulated indigenous knowledge passed hand to hand and generation to generation across the same landscape he was crossing. Smith and his party survived that crossing, not because they were lucky, because they were literate in a language that the modern world has completely stopped teaching. So what changed? What did we trade that knowledge for? And why does the replacement keep failing us? Before we get into the full investigation, I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a situation where your water got cut off, a storm, a pipe break, a boil notice, and you realized within 20 minutes that you had absolutely no plan? Drop that in the comments, because what you're about to discover is going to permanently change the way you look at every landscape you have ever walked through. You may never look at a cottonwood tree the same way again. Let's talk about what water looks like in your home right now. You turn the tap, it runs, you don't think about where it comes from. Most people genuinely cannot tell you. The answer is a network of underground pipes, some cast iron, some concrete, many of them laid down before your parents were born, pressurized by treatment plants drawing from reservoirs or aquifers, filtered and chlorinated and fluoridated. I should push through roughly 2.2 million miles of distribution lines to reach your faucet. It is an engineering marvel. It genuinely is. And the American Society of Civil Engineers, the people whose entire profession is grading America's infrastructure, gave the U.S. drinking water system a C- in their 2025 report card. C-. That is not a passing grade, that is barely surviving. About a third of all water mains in this country are over 50 years old. Nearly 20% are past their useful design life entirely. Every single day in North America, roughly 850 water main breaks occur. Not a year, a day. The United States loses an estimated 2.1 trillion gallons of treated drinking water every year to leaks before it ever reaches a single home. And the EPA estimates the funding gap needed to fix all of it sits at around $625 billion. Now contrast every one of those numbers against Jedediah Smith, who used roughly 2 to 4 gallons of water a day and found every drop of it himself, in terrain that would kill an unprepared person within 48 hours. He had no pipe, he had no treatment plant, he had no grid, he had a system built from knowledge, and it never broke, not once, because knowledge cannot rust, cannot crack. and does not require a $625 billion repair budget. Here's the part that should make you genuinely angry. The knowledge that Smith and Kit Carson and Jim Bridger carried in their heads was not lost in a fire. It was not forbidden by law. It was not buried in a vault. It was simply made inconvenient and then ignored, and then forgotten, one generation at a time. As municipal water systems spread quietly across the country, the first major American city water system opened in Philadelphia in 1799, driven by yellow fever epidemics that had been killing thousands. The Croton Aqueduct reached New York in 1842. The post-World War II suburban boom connected the rest, and with each new pipe laid in the ground, one more family stopped teaching their children how to read the land for water. The system did not fail the people. The people simply stopped needing to know, until the system started failing. If you do not know how to find water without a tap, that is not your failure. Nobody taught you. The knowledge was quietly declared obsolete by systems that profit from your complete dependence on infrastructure. Your grandparents knew. Their grandparents knew better still. The world changed around you, and then it stopped passing down the tools you would need when the world changed again. So, let's learn what Smith and Carson actually knew, because every piece of this is documented, every piece of it is validated by modern science, and every piece of it is still true. Layer 1. The cottonwood tree, and what it tells you about the ground beneath your feet. Here is a fact that the United States Geological Survey has been documenting since at least 1927. Cottonwood trees are what hydrologists call obligate phrydophytes. That is a technical term, but the concept is beautifully simple. Cottonwoods can only survive where groundwater sits within roughly 20 feet of the surface, usually much closer. They do not grow in dry dirt. They cannot. Their root systems drive downward relentlessly until they hit the water table, and without that contact, the tree dies. So, when a mountain man crossing an arid valley spotted cottonwoods on the distant horizon, those tall, pale-barked, shimmering trees, he did not see scenery. He saw a map. He saw the land telling him, plainly and with total accuracy, that water was beneath that spot. Willows signal water even nearer to the surface, often just a few feet down. Cattails and rushes require standing water or saturated soil. Their presence is nearly a guarantee. Think of it this way. Those trees are drilling rigs that already did the work for you. They found the aquifer decades ago. They are simply growing on top of it and marking the spot. Mountain men didn't need a map with a well on it. The landscape drew the map for them in green. Modern homes do not teach this. And that gap between what the land is saying and what we no longer know how to hear is exactly where the forgotten trick lives. But here's where it gets more remarkable. Plant signals were only the first layer. Smith knew you also had to read the shape of the land itself. Layer 2. Reading terrain the way a hydrologist reads a contour map. Water follows the path of least resistance without exception. It percolates downward through permeable rock, sandstone, limestone, fractured granite, until it strikes something impermeable, shale, clay, solid granite. Then it moves laterally along that boundary until it finds a weak point and emerges at the surface as a spring. The mountain men understood this mechanically without ever having studied geology formally. They looked for V-shaped canyon bottoms and valley floors because the water table is always closest to the surface at the lowest elevation. They targeted the outside bends of dry creek beds because even in a wash that runs completely dry above ground, digging 1 or 2 feet into the outer bend almost always reaches water pooled in the sediment beneath. They watched for the base of talus slopes where loose rock accumulates at the foot of cliffs because water percolates through that material and pools where it meets solid ground. They looked for patches of unexplained deep green on brown hillsides, a seep, a slow bleed from a buried spring, feeding plants that have no logical reason to be that green in that place. Kit Carson's biographer Charles Burdett wrote in 1869 that Carson had memorized every feature of the wild landscape, its rivers and the oases upon their banks, with its river beds whose streams had found a passage beneath the surface of the earth. That was not poetry. That was a description of a man doing field hydrology with his eyes before the word hydrology existed as a discipline. If you're finding this valuable, hit like right now, because what comes next is the layer that almost every modern survival guide skips entirely, and it is the one that saved the most lives. Layer 3. The animals already found the water. They just never told you to follow them. Animals need water every single day. They have mapped every source within their territory across generations, and their behavior encodes that map in ways you can read if you know what to look for. Converging game trails are the most reliable signal. Individual trails spread across a landscape but gradually angle downhill toward a single common point. That convergence is not coincidence. It is a biological consensus built over a century of hoofbeats. Every deer, elk, and bison has voted for the same destination. Follow the convergence and you find the water. Bird behavior is equally precise. Grain-eating birds, doves, pigeons, finches fly low and straight toward water at dawn and dusk. They do not meander, they move with purpose. Jedediah Smith recorded this exact observation in his 1827 journal. When his party desperately needed water and the landscape offered no obvious answer, Smith wrote that he spotted several turtle doves, and since he did not recollect of ever having seen them more than 2 or 3 miles from water, he spent more than an hour searching the area based on their direction of flight. He found it. It saved them. Kit Carson wrote that his pack mules smelled water long before his party had any realistic hope of finding it during a Mojave crossing. Bees rarely range more than 6 kilometers from a water source. Watch which direction they fly when they leave a flower. These are not folk tales. These are behavioral ecology principles that survival instructors still teach today because they have never stopped being true. The land was always speaking. The mountain men simply never stopped listening. Layer 4. The spring itself and why it was the safest water on the continent. When rainfall percolates downward through layers of sand, gravel, and rock over months or years before emerging at a spring, something remarkable happens along the way. It is physically filtered by the tightness of mineral pores. Sediment cannot pass through. It is chemically transformed by mineral contact, picking up calcium, magnesium, and bicarbonate. And it is biologically cleaned by time. Pathogenic organisms in the surface water survive days or weeks, but water that has traveled through an aquifer for years arrives largely free of everything dangerous that was ever in it. The USGS confirms that springs emerging from deep geological formations are among the most reliably clean natural water sources available. The mountain men did not know the microbiology. They did not need to. They knew from hard experience that spring water kept them alive, and that stagnant downstream water made them sick. The observation was enough. The science confirmed it a century later. For generations before municipal water arrived, American farms relied on the spring house, a small stone structure built directly over a natural spring, providing clean water and natural refrigeration simultaneously, holding a steady 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit year-round through nothing more than the Earth's own temperature. No electricity, no compressor, no monthly bill, just stone, water, and the understanding of how the ground works. Almost every one of those spring houses is gone now, demolished or abandoned. The knowledge that built them went with them. So, why did we abandon this entire system? It was not stupidity. It was 3 forces arriving simultaneously and pushing in the same direction. Speed. Municipal water could connect 10,000 homes faster than anyone could teach 10,000 families to locate their own spring. Industrial cities were dying of cholera and typhoid, diseases spread through contaminated water, and centralized treatment genuinely saved hundreds of thousands of lives. But the speed of that solution left no room for parallel systems. The pipe arrived, everything else was declared redundant, and the redundancy was gone before anyone calculated what it would cost to live without it. Cost. There was never a commercial incentive to teach people a skill that made them self-sufficient. A family that knows how to find a spring buys nothing. A family dependent on municipal infrastructure pays a connection fee, a monthly bill. and increasingly, a filtration subscription on top because the tap water itself is no longer fully trusted. Water literacy had no price tag. That made it worthless to an economy that needed something to sell. And technology, electric pumps, PVC pipe, cheap chlorine. By the mid-20th century, the tools for centralized water delivery became so affordable and ubiquitous that a private spring felt like a relic of poverty rather than a form of independence. The old system seemed unnecessary. So it was abandoned quietly, one generation at a time, until the average American has no functional relationship with the water beneath their own land, and no plan for the morning the tap runs dry. Here is what you can do with this knowledge. 3 levels. Start wherever feels honest. The easiest step costs nothing and starts today. Learn to read plant indicators in whatever landscape you already move through. Download a plant identification app and spend 15 minutes learning what cottonwood and willow look like in your region. Both are identifiable by leaf shape and bark texture. The next time you are hiking, driving through open country, or walking through a park, start scanning. Look for clusters of those trees in otherwise dry terrain. Look for lines of green tracing low ground across a hillside. You are teaching yourself to read a map that has always existed and that nobody told you was there. That skill, once built, does not leave you. The intermediate step is to identify a real water source near where you live. The USGS National Water Information System is a free public database. Search it for springs within a few miles of your property. Or simply walk to the lowest elevation point within half a mile of your home and look for cottonwoods, willows, or unexpected green. If you locate a viable spring, learn what it takes to develop it properly. A spring box is a stone or concrete collection chamber built at the emergence point, sealed on 3 sides against surface contamination, with a screened overflow pipe and a gravity-fed line running to a storage tank downhill. The spring does the work, gravity moves the water. A ceramic gravity-fed filter handles remaining biological risk. No electricity, no pump, no failure mode except the spring itself, which in most cases has been flowing since long before the first house was ever built on that land. The minimum, if nothing else, is simply to know your land. Walk the lowest point of your property. Look for the indicators. Know whether groundwater is accessible beneath you and roughly how deep. Know where the nearest natural water source within 1 mile is located and how to reach it on foot. Because 850 times a day in North America, a pipe breaks, the people who recover fastest are not the ones with the most bottled water in a garage. They are the ones who already knew where the water was before the pipe ever existed. Jedediah Smith was not a man stumbling through wilderness on instinct and luck. He was a systems thinker operating a complete water intelligence network, reading plants, terrain, animals, birds, and geology simultaneously, cross-referencing what he observed against knowledge that Mojave guides and Tongva elders had passed directly into his hands across years of shared terrain. He crossed the most brutal landscapes on this continent, repeatedly, and he was rarely without water for long, because he understood something we have spent 2 centuries very deliberately unlearning. The knowledge was not lost, it was abandoned, traded for a pipe, a monthly bill, and the quiet, comfortable, catastrophically fragile illusion that someone else had permanently solved the problem. They had not. The C- is the proof. The 850 breaks a day are the proof. The 2.1 trillion gallons bleeding into the earth every year while most people have no backup plan. That is the proof. If this is the kind of recovered knowledge you want more of, the real skills, the real systems, the true history of how people solved their own problems before the modern world taught them to outsource everything, subscribe. We are digging up what was buried. Tell us in the comments what you want us to investigate next. Water, food, shelter, energy. The old ways worked. We are going to prove it, one forgotten trick at a time.